Tom Hammock. You're the production designer for the horror anthology series Them, which is about a black family moving into a white California suburb in the 1950s. What was the starting point for kind of developing the visual style for this community that's very much idyllic on the surface, but horrific just underneath?
I think we really started with color, with the idea that the exterior of all these houses would be fairly uniform and beautiful pastels, and that with the white neighbors, that those pastel colors would basically be the interior colors, and yet with our various black families that had moved out to Los Angeles, their houses would all be extremely dark inside. And that was sort of where things were rooted, and everything kind of spiraled out from there.
And where did you sort of draw inspiration from and do research from to kind of develop those particular styles, the wallpapers, the furniture? Like, where did that research happen?
Well, we spent a lot of time going around LA and going to some of the architectural libraries, both at UCLA and up at UC Berkeley, in part because we were searching for original redline maps from the banks and contracts to then try to reproduce. And in the course of, the search for those documents, we ended up with a lot of the other architectural elements that you need. As one interesting thing was everybody loves Eichler houses, from that era, but because Eichler is a developer and an architect, had tried to fight this process himself. We had tried to stay away from all of those elements when it came to the houses and try to be a little more generic.
And the Emery house is so central to the story. And what were the decisions that went in there? And as you said, you wanted those homes to be a little bit darker, given the supernatural and horrific events that surround these characters.
So a lot of the decisions really were based on the horror and the supernatural things that happen. And for instance, the wallpaper really was a choice that came about so that in low light situations, a lot of the spiritual antagonists that haunt our characters because of their pasts they're in black. And to see them moving in extremely low light situations, it was, rather than have a wall that was painted straight, it was far better to have a pattern that then these spirits could move against, and you were able to see movement in the very deep back and of a room and see that the creatures were there. And then we tried to, basically the 1950s home layouts with the very boxy bedrooms are not all that conducive to horror. So we worked at giving, each bedroom a throat at the entrance right when you open the door, so you can never see a full room. There's always a blind spot. There's always something casting shadows. You're sitting in bed and you're looking directly across to a closet that could open at any time. So trying to manipulate things a little bit to help the horror of each episode.
Were those wallpaper prints, designed specifically for the show, or were they bought? What went into that?
I think about maybe 25% were purchased, and everything else was specifically designed for the show. And again, and then some of them we would purchase a roll and then camera test them in low light situations, and then redesign and reprint, basically just changing the colors, just because low light is so difficult at certain points with how we were trying to expose the creatures. So yeah, but ultimately we ended up having to custom make a lot of it.
And it feels like a lot of characters have a lot of color associations, color palettes. Like Alison Pill is one of the major antagonistic characters
Yeah.
to the Emmys, and she is often surrounded in blue in her home, in her wardrobe. What was that color choice like?
Uh, well, basically, our we had assigned colors across all of our main kind of white characters just to so that you could clearly know immediately where you were, because often we go to them just for snippets. We're really with the Emmys for so much of this show, and the Emmys that gave us a lot more leeway to change colors room to room and be, in different spaces and different palettes with them and the other African American characters. But the white characters, we wanted to really keep each one specifically within their colors, regardless of where they were in the show.
And outside of the suburb, you've got Henry's Aerospace Job, and that location is also very visually striking. This kind of expansive space. What was it like, creating that a space or finding that space, or how did that come about?
Well, that ended up being kind of a grouping of a whole lot of different locations and sets together to create the space, just to give it a huge, vast feel. And it definitely had one of the favorite locations that came up through doing research, where I had no idea that aerospace engineers would draw airplane parts at full size. So there is a really fun space where the most of the floor of a drafting room is all these people in suits and ties, like laying down and drafting engine parts, like literally full scale, so you can see what happens. And so that drafting room ultimately was a favorite of the crew. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And there's one episode that flashes back further in time, Covenant 2, and it's black and white, and we see more of the history of this area. How does that kind of filming in black and white change the design considerations, the visual considerations that go into it?
Oh man, lots and lots of testing. Um, because obviously you have the unique qualities of black and white, where, for instance, red and green will photograph in the same way. So to get the depth, there are all the little changes are to do with aging is more prominent. So we really would, the DP Checo and I would sit and we'd paint things as tests and then photograph it and do this again and again and again until we really got a look that worked and communicated what we wanted to get across for the episode within the spaces.
And throughout the series, you've talked about the lighting and the colors. I imagine that it must have been a very close collaboration with the costume department and cinematography. What was that collaboration like across departments to kind of create a cohesive sense of setting?
It was great. So we had obviously two DPs, Checo and Javi, and then Marianne, the costume designer. And really, we'd have these meetings where, the 4 or 5 department heads would get together and we'd lay out paint chips and cloth swatches and just really talk through where we were going to go with the colors, with the textures for these different aspects, especially knowing that some of these things would have to not only be shot in color, but also ultimately be shot in black and white. So that was informing choices very early on in the creation of the show. But it was just a lot of fun to have all those people together and on board.
And what are some of your like favorite small details to work on to the visual flourishes? Like I just remember there's one shot of like a wall of axes in a hardware store that felt like very incredibly striking and interesting. And what were some of those details for you that you liked?
Well, the Axe Wall was a lot of fun. Honestly, a couple of things. The interior of the root cellar was a whole lot of fun with all the canning jars. Because I'd worked in a couple of old farmhouses in South Carolina that had walls that were nothing but canning jars. And so, with the ability to shoot through that, we really kind of delved into that detail. And the bomb shelter was also a lot of fun to be able to recreate sort of the height of the 50s, you know, when the nuclear warriors were on everybody's mind, and delving into a homemade bomb shelter. That was that was a lot of fun. And then the detail that I know, sort of slips by, but might have been the most difficult to work with was the paperwork, the just endless paperwork these banks would produce, and trying to find the exact language that was used to describe these changing neighborhoods and the red line process and the process of the codes and covenants in these contracts. And just trying to get all that language exactly right. All the paperwork, lots went into that. So,
Well, I want to congratulate you on the show, and your work on it, and thank you so much for joining us. And we'll actually keep you on for our group chat.
all right, thanks, Danny.